admit I do feel kind of sluggish today. Not on my game. So you need to push me along, please.
Hey, but 2 days till the weekend.
Huh?
2 days till the weekend.
Yeah, thank you, sir. Make sure you're doing the readings for the course, by the way. Remember to follow the schedule for the readings because we have a quiz coming up at the end of next week, yes? So I might ask you some questions about the readings just to make sure you're still doing them. Even if I'm not there yet, just go, as it says in the syllabus, follow the readings even if I'm still talking about violence. So if you haven't read like Sam Harris or something, Dictionary of Biblical Theology, the article on violence, you might want to take a look. Well, you should have read because we're talking about violence. But I was listening to Sam Harris on the way here today and the other day. Interesting. It's a longish reading. I apologize for that, but hopefully you'll find it interesting. All right, so where did I stop? Still talking about violence. All right. Well, we got to a definition of violence, and I guess, stumbled upon an insight. I guess that's a good thing. That violence, if it comes from the Latin word violo, which can mean profane, then technically violence is a form of profanity. It's profanity. It's not religious. So I guess I could ask the question, can any violence truly be called religious violence? It's like a contradiction in terms because religion deals with the sacred by definition or by explanation. Whereas profane is not sacred, but that which is not sacred. That's interesting. I got to think about that one some more. But I think that's an interesting insight. I hope you think it's interesting as well. But we do see the presence of the religious question even in the word, even if violence is the opposite of what's religion, or the sacred. It's profane. Okay. But it is anti-religious in its meaning. Violence in its meaning is anti-religious. And then there's the question of, well, I don't know if I want to talk about this. I talked about it before, but Angela, do I want to talk about this? I guess it doesn't really. I guess, well, it ties into this. Sorry, I'm talking to myself. I'm gibbering. Because there is a question about, I have the claim here, violence seems to be a properly human activity, doesn't it? Seems to be a properly human activity when we talk about violence. Because someone could say, well, what about natural events or animal violence? Because I said before when we first started talking about violence that, the universe is violent. What did I say here? I mean, the universe, it's a cosmic phenomenon. People and animals show aggression, okay? Things in the astronomical world crash into each other or they explode and destroy other things. It seems violence is like built in even to the natural world. So how can I say it's properly human? Well, I guess natural events, like if an asteroid, where something were to break off from an asteroid and become a meteoroid and then enter our atmosphere, which makes it a meteor, and then actually strike our planet, which makes it a meteorite. If it were big enough, it could cause a lot of damage and destruction to an area of the planet, could kill a lot of people. That seems to be violent, it's the exertion of force. I don't know if there's the intention there. If the intentionality is lacking, it qualifies, and maybe that's why. I mean, there's force and injury, but it doesn't really have, the intentionality is not there. I mean, the meteorite, it's a meteorite, it's a conglomeration of rocks and heavy metals, it's where I guess there's no consciousness. I'm going to assume there's no consciousness there that's forming an intention to harm us. It's like, I'm going to smash into that little blue planet, that little blue dot there, kill a lot of people. That's my intention. What do you got there? Is that Rice Krispie treat? Ooh, very nice. Ooh, those are good. Those are tasty. Too much sugar for me, unfortunately. I can vicariously enjoy it through you, Mr. Saunders.
Watching things.
What? I-
Those videos of people eating food, you watch those?
No. I didn't even know that. Is that a thing that you can watch videos where of people eating food?
They make a lot of money on it.
Well, why? Why would I mean, Mr. Saunders, I'm not going to pull up a chair and watch you eat, but I hope you enjoy it. I would enjoy it if I could eat it, but given my form.
Don't say that.
Okay, Mr. Second. Huh? Thank you, sir. Yeah, so I wouldn't say that there's an intent of the meteorite that's lacking. So it's not properly, it's not being properly aggressive because there doesn't seem to be a desire to master or dominate. Okay, there's nothing there to form the intent to dominate. The meteorite is just crashing into the planet. It's a purely physical, natural action. It's just the physics in action, really. Something hits into something else. It directs us into the orbit of our planet, or the gravity of our planet or the mass of our planet tracks it into us. And if it's large enough, then it will penetrate the atmosphere and crash into the planet and will explode. There'll be a release of energy. That's all physics. That's nothing necessarily good or bad about it. It's just natural physics. That's what's supposed to happen. So I can't say it's aggressive. So I would say that a natural event is violent only by analogy or comparison. Comparison, say, maybe to our violence. It's analogous to how we are violent. Okay? We talk about the weather being violent, okay, as we are violent, destructive. Right? So it's analogous. It's a comparison, I think, in the natural world. Animal violence is a little trickier because animals do seem to be conscious of something, conscious of themselves in some way. And intent is mostly unknown. It's unidentifiable. I mean, how do I know what your intent is? I can think I know what your intent is. There might be indicators of what your intent is. But then you might say, well, no, that wasn't my intention at all. I step into this all the time. Say something or do something. I remember I went to a job interview. It's out in Indiana. I didn't get the job, obviously. I don't even know why I went. What was it for? I think it was for a diocese. Yeah, it was for a diocese. It was, which one was it? Well, I can't remember. I think it was to be in their headache's office or something like that. Anyway, I went there. I didn't know I was going to get the job, and we didn't get the job. Whatever, but it didn't go well. The first time I came to a big room for the interview, and there were three ladies there interviewing me. Okay, and I'm shaking hands, normal, right? Nothing untoward there, right? Then I come to the third lady. For some reason, I shook her hand overly long, and I looked her in. I was trying to look her in the eye, not. But it came off as rude. I knew it was creepy. I had to pull my hand back because I thought I was creepy, and I could tell it. And I could see it in her face. That at least that's what I thought. Maybe again, attention. Maybe it was nothing, but I felt creeped out. Wasn't my intention. I was trying to be really polite because I didn't want to tank the job. And I wasn't, sure if I was going to get it, but I certainly didn't want to lose it if they were going to offer it. But those things happen. Wasn't my intent, but whatever. So you don't always, that's why I think, at least for Catholics, moral theology, you're always supposed, it's, a principle of Catholic Christian ethics and whatever, to try to assume the good intentions of another person, even if you don't know them. Don't immediately assume that the person has a bad intention. To see what they're doing in a positive light until you have evidence that it's not meant to be positive. Okay? Just out of charity, out of love. It's love your neighbor as yourself. Treat another person. Would you like to be treated with the benefit of the doubt? Probably, I would. So treat others with the benefit of the doubt. Yeah. It's part of Christian ethics. Until you have contrary information. So I might come off, as aggressive. I hope I don't. But I'm not trying to be. But if I were, tell me and say, why are you yelling at me? Or why are you doing that? I say, oh, wait a second. I didn't realize, that wasn't my intention. I didn't realize that was how I was coming off to you. Okay? The animals, you can't know because we can't talk to them. We don't know what's in their mind necessarily. Sometimes they can let us know. They can, like I remember one time I pet a dog on nice dog, but I pet it. It had an ear infection, which would have been nice had the owner told me before I start going to scratch the dog's ear. But I guess maybe I moved too quickly. Anyways, but like within a split second, this dog, which was a big dog, had my hand in its mouth just very quickly. Just quickly turned its head up from, I don't even know how it did it really, because I was scratching the ear. But it hurted. It was painful. I didn't know. And it just turned its head up and swiped my hand, like at least what I could feel, through its teeth. Firmly. But it let me know. I think I understood. Didn't want me to do that. It was aggressive. But it wasn't violent because it didn't bite me. It didn't try to bite me. But it was aggressive. I think there was some intention there, indicating to me. It could have bitten me, could have lashed out at me, but it didn't. So the violence of an animal, I would think, is on a different level. Okay? I don't think it's like human violence, which can truly be intentional. Most times, I don't think, babies are violent. They can slap you or something like that. I don't think they mean to. But, but there might be a certain logic to animal violence. If a person's dog attacks another, for example, if, I'm walking my dog and it goes after another person, or another dog or whatever, and there's damage, there's injury to that other person or something, police don't arrest the dog. They don't throw the dog in the back of the cruiser, They don't put the dog's mug shot on television. Here's Pepper. She did a bad thing, Pepper. The dog doesn't go to court in front of the judge. It's the owner. The owner's going to go. The owner's going to be charged or maybe sued. Because even though the owner didn't attack the person, the animal did, we kind of make that distinction. We know the difference between animal violence and human violence. There is some difference that we recognize. So again, I would say even in the case of animal violence, where maybe there could be some intent or consciousness going on, I still think it's analogous to human violence. In the case of natural events, we describe them in a human way, violent and stuff like that. Oh, that's Mother Nature, doing her business, and hopefully we won't get a hurricane. You hear maybe we might get a hurricane on Halloween. I hope not. I hope not. Something churning down in the Caribbean. I hope it doesn't come up this way and ruin Halloween, but, whatever. That's Mother Nature. Well, no, it's not. It's not a person. It's a bunch of moisture and all sorts of other stuff, There's no intent there. Mother Nature has no intent about ruining my Halloween. A dog or an animal, I said, is a little trickier. But I still think it's analogous. It's comparative. We're comparing it to our violence to them. Were you comparing it to human violence? What types of violence can there be? Well, here they are. There's physical violence, mental violence, psychological violence, emotional violence. Goes by different names. I have psychological on the uncontrollable. What am I going to do with you? Yeah. What's our... Oh, you are? Oh, I'm sorry, sir. See, I didn't know the intent. Mr. Henry, I was wrong. I violated Christian ethics, right? Wasn't I supposed to assume the best? I assumed the worst. I'm sorry, Jennifer. I'll have to bring that up in confession. Psychological, but mental or emotional. And then finally, passive aggressive violence, which is my term. Because it's described, but no one gave a term to it, so I just decided to call it passive aggressive. But, okay. Physical violence is obvious, I think. Physical, material damage to another, material damage, if that hurricane comes up here for Halloween, fells a tree or something, or blows a roof off a house, that's material damage, it's physical. If you do it to something like us that has nerve endings and pain receptors, then yes, it can cause pain as well. I don't think the house is feeling any pain if its roof gets ripped off. But if the hurricane, if the roof blows the roof onto me and crushes me, well, there will be pain involved. And so not just physical damage, but also there will be pain. And physical violence, obviously, as well, can be directed against other people, animals, things, or property, but also groups, group violence. So we get into the question of genocide and stuff, where a whole group is attacked, not just, even though you might be attacking individuals within the group, but because they belong to that group, they're attacked. So they'll also extend it to group violence as physical violence. Psychological violence. Psychological violence is non-physical. It's aiming at non-physical damage. You want to damage the emotional well-being of a person. And you want to evoke harmful or destructive emotions. You want them to feel bad about themselves. So you're trying to tell me not to say I'm fat, or point out to the fact that I'm fat. All right, whatever. I do have mirrors at home, right? Yeah. It's not like it's not obvious, right? Anyways, I work on it. Anyways, but yeah, but if someone kept pointing it out to me, like all the time, where clearly they're trying to diminish me by it, okay, they're trying to cause some kind of damage, make me feel bad about myself, about my situation. Yeah, that's harmful. Even though it's not maybe physical harm, it doesn't leave a bruise, or it doesn't leave a literal actual scar on the brain, but it can affect the functioning of the brain. It's especially important, when if any of you are doing counseling or social work, and you have to take anyone doing social work or something. Anyone have to take any psychology courses? Some of you? Okay. Especially with little children, because it's all about them. What do you tell them? Like if a little child is just sitting there, and every time the parent is around, I should say every time, but a lot of times when the parent is around the child, parent has to say, you're doing that wrong. Okay. I want it done this way. Over and over, day after day, there's always something whatever the child is doing, okay? It becomes ingrained in the psyche of the kid, apparently. At least that's what my counselor told me when she was explaining some of the things I was going through. As a parent, if something happens repetitively, it can do maybe not physical damage to the brain, but to the way the brain works. So I become an adult who's obsessed about never doing stuff wrong, which can be a blessing in some ways if, you know, you want someone to always, you know, really, if they're, you know, hey, that, you know, Bob really is a hard worker. He gets the job, doesn't finish work until it's done, you know, and it's always done right, you know, he does good work. Okay, that's a positive, maybe a positive outlet for psychological illness. But, you know, Bob never gets the job done because it's never perfect enough. There's always something wrong, or he always did something the wrong way. And there are people like that, you know, they never get it done, get the work job done. So psychological violence. And believe it or not, there are people who do this on purpose. Yeah, not every parent, it's sad to say that, but, you know, they don't see the child as with love. They see the child as, I don't know what they see the child as, an object to be, I guess, dominated and mastered. That's where we get into questions of evil, I think. That's an interesting, I don't think we talk about evil enough. Because you don't want to think that there might be a person who actually is committed to evil, you know, like, just like people who are committed to acts of kindness and love. You know, you see the bumper stickers, you know, random acts of committed, random act of kindness today or something. Or if you saw a bumper sticker that was just like, commit an intentional act of evil today. You know, you don't see those. But are there people who are like that? You think so? So I'd say psychological damage applies principally to persons, but I think it can be applied to other beings that are worthy of respect and also have some kind of psychological workings, a brain, you might say, like animals. You know, I think animals can be psychologically damaged when they're abused and stuff like that. Um, and then we have passive, what I'm calling passive aggressive violence, which is kind of the reverse of inflicting harm, whereas physical violence inflicts pain and harm or damage. Okay, passive aggressive is where harm or damage is inflicted by inaction, not doing something. You're refusing to do something that you really are obliged to do. So getting back to a parent, say a parent who starves her children or starves his children, refuses to give them anything to eat. Or won't, you know, puts them in a cage or something. We've heard these stories, you know, because they don't want them to go out. Maybe it's for their own good. The parent thinks it's for their own good. If they go out of the house, they'll get hurt or something. So you lock them in the room for the rest of their life. Really lock them in their room. That's a kind of violence, even though the person might not be physically harming the person. They are inflicting harm on them. You can maybe say it's a form of psychological violence. Okay. But again, psychological violence, you're still doing something, saying something, and doing something to inflict the damage. Here, you're not doing anything. I'm not touching the kid. I'm not beating the kid. I'm not hitting him. Just not feeding him. Well, why? I want him to get fat. I keep coming back to the fatness today. Well, anyways, but, you know, or for some reason, I don't know. I'm just spitballing, but yeah, you're just not feeding, some people are not feeding their kids. Why? When they have the means. Passive aggressive violence. According to the Cambridge Dictionary of Philosophy and its article on violence, second edition, which I looked up, according to whoever wrote this article for the Cambridge Dictionary of Philosophy, violence can also include showing disrespect to something that's valued or considered sacred. And so some people would add to that list what they call cultural violence. Sometimes you hear about this. Okay. or people, when I hear about it, usually people say cultural genocide, but I think they mean cultural violence. All right. Okay, you can harm a people's culture. For example, my people, the Irish. I mean, we don't speak English. Our language is Gaelic, traditionally, historically, which is dying out. But why don't we speak English? Well, because about 1,000 years ago, the English invaded Ireland and took over and oppressed the Irish for hundreds and hundreds of years, forbade us to speak Gaelic in school or otherwise. And if we did, we were violated. You get beaten up or something bad would happen to you. And so we all speak English now. Right? Yeah, that's a kind of violence. Or, I mean, even physical violence was inflicted on us to take this part of our culture away from us. Okay. But, I'm not sure if cultural violence really works within the definition because I think it's a little bit too broad. I mean, I think it's a little bit too broad. It can include too many things. And I think I want to keep a clear picture of violence as true violence, actual destructiveness. Okay? Okay, they wouldn't let us speak our language, but they didn't destroy it. It's there. Okay? It would, just that people didn't speak it because they weren't supposed to. Or they made you feel guilty for speaking it. So I don't want to take away the, that's what I'm looking for. The gravity, the seriousness of what violence really is, actual destructiveness. Okay. All right, whatever. You might not agree with me, that's fine. All right. That's just my thinking on it, that it's a little too broad. Violence causes injury of some sort. Harm, injury, causes harm or damage. Harm or damage. Okay. Violence causes damage. Or injury. And the Latin word injuria is based on the word jus in Latin, which can mean law, can be used for the word law, so against the law. But what is binding to do, what you're bound to do, your obligations. It also has the understanding of a right, can be used in that, translated in that way as right, or your duties, justice. So violence is a form of injustice. According to, if it causes injury, it causes injustice. It takes away what is right, what is due somebody else, Mr. Gaines, like respect or whatever. You're violating that. You're causing that injury. Disrespecting. So it's an injustice. Your justice is to give what is due to something or someone else. Okay, what they deserve as a human person or as a god or whatever. I'm not doing that. So I'm injuring you. It's an injustice. So an injury, an injuria, was something that was done or is done contrary to justice or contrary to the law. The law is supposed to enforce justice, how we're supposed to treat each other. Okay? Did I put that in the PowerPoint? I don't know. And if you read the article speaking of the Dictionary of Biblical Theology, which was written by Savior Leon Dufour, Savier, but I'll say Savior Leon Dufour, French priest, I believe. And then thankfully someone translated into English. If you read the little article on violence in the Dictionary of Biblical Theology, that's precisely kind of how the biblical writers in the Christian scriptures and the Jewish scriptures view violence as injustice. That's how it's kind of viewed. You're not following the order of the universe that God has established. You're not treating God or others as they ought to be treated justly. So God should be worshiped. The poor should be taken care of. Okay, strangers or foreigners should be safe if they journey into your area. They should be taken care of with hospitality, et cetera, and so forth. You know, rulers should not be corrupt. Judges should not be corrupt and give out corrupt decisions favoring one over another for whatever reason. So injustice was seen as what kind of like violence is. So it includes the idea of physical violence, but it doesn't have to in the Bible. Okay, for failing to pay a worker a just wage, okay, or at all for the work that he's done or she's done. That's an injustice. That's described as violence in the Bible. Okay, you're not treating the person properly. So, interesting. Just as I said that not all forms of aggression are necessarily violent, but all violent acts of violence are forms of aggression. Yes, we can also say that all forms of violence are injustice. Some injustice. All forms of violence are instances of injustice. Someone is not being treated as they properly should be. But not all forms of injustice are necessarily violence. Okay? And we need to be careful about this, especially in this age of rage, as Jonathan Turley calls it. He's a lawyer. The age of rage. Everybody's angry, and not just angry anymore, raging, hateful, outraged. We have to be careful about this, I think. We have to distinguish, because I think, especially in our climate now, people can broaden violence to include any kind of bad behavior or anything that they consider unjust. Okay? Which is not necessary. Again, I don't want to, it's so broad, it takes away from the real gravity of violence. I mean, if a person just calls you a bad name or a bad word, which is very hurtful to you, it can hurt your feelings, okay. That causes injury. It's an injustice. You're not being treated or respected the way you ought to be. But is it violence? Some people would say yes. Microaggressions and stuff like that. You don't use the proper pronoun or use a certain epithet about a group of people. I'm not even talking about bad epithets, just like, when I was, because the words change and what people want to be called, groups want to be called. There were things when I was growing up, and even now, you wouldn't call black people people of color, because it sounds like you're calling them colored people. And I was told you don't call people like that. You don't do it. But now that's the terminology, right? Like, whoa, no, he or she's a person of color. It's like, okay. When I hear that, I'm like, not supposed to say that. It's not nice. Well, anyway, was told not to define people by their color in the first place. So things can change. Words can change. How people talk can change. Is it violence, though? Some people would say, yeah, it is violence. How you describe another group, you're dehumanizing the person. Yeah? You're taking away from their humanity, how they want to be described or known. You won't call them that or use those words of terminology. Okay. Or the way you talk about a certain group of people. your description, your stereotype. Okay. I see the point. I just think it's making it too broad. Okay, I'm not saying can't be, can't be. I'm not saying it can't be, but I just don't want it to be because I think it overruns it and then it makes violence have no meaning in a sense. If everything can be like this, then nothing is it. That's just my thinking. But okay. But I'm open to being convinced otherwise. Shouldn't that pressing the end? Oh, that's right. Turn that off. So I don't care. So, for example, Darlene Fozard-Weaver, in her article, one of our readings on violence and religion in Introduction to Religious Studies, says, quote, and let's see if I put this on the PowerPoint. Actually, well, whatever. I'll move on from this. No, it's not on the PowerPoint. Deliberate and overt, or she says interpersonal violence is not just deliberate and overt infliction of physical, as well as emotional, psychological, and spiritual harm. Oh, okay, spiritual violence. That's another thing. Interesting. But is also harming others through unjustly acquiring or damaging their property, or restricting or denying their access to resources essential for human life and well-being, like food and water. Okay, yeah, basically what I've said. That's kind of passive-aggressive violence. And, you could classify it as that. But again, I think Fozard-Weaver is being a little bit too broad here in her description of violence. I mean, certain things are certainly unjust in my view, and certainly wrong, but are they violence? Is neglect violence if you're neglectful of your children? Okay. I think we need to see violence for what it really is and not just make it synonymous with the word bad. What you did was bad. Well, that's violence. And you kind of mean the same thing, Or I don't like what you did, so I classify it as violence, I feel violated, or something like that. All right, well, whatever. Just my thoughts, my thinking. The effects of violence. The effects of violence. Where are we going with this here? Really? It just seems to go on and on and on, Mr. Ruddle. When does it stop? Well, December, but... How you doing, Mr. Ruddle?
Yourself?
Circling the drain. It's just been a weird day. So I'm just kind of sluggish today. Anyways. So what are the effects of violence? As per the World Health Organization in their study they did in 2021, I give you the source here below. You can find it online on injuries and violence. According to them, violence-related injuries kill about 1,250,000 people every year. Though this statistic apparently, or these deaths, include everything from murder and suicide to traffic-related deaths. So, take that with a grain of salt. It's like, oh, wow, 1.25 million people. Well, okay, some of them are murdered, but other ones, they, just crashed their car or something. I don't know if I would say that that's violence if someone just crashes their car. Compared to someone whose life is unjustly taken by another person, or kills himself or herself, God forbid. But okay, 1.25 million people. And more specifically, in 2019, an estimated 475,000 people worldwide were victims of murder. So that amounts to about 6.2 human beings per 100,000, in case you're wondering. I don't know if that's good or bad, though. Is that as high as you might have thought it might have been, Miss Colonna? Or is that good or bad? That's only 6 people in 100,000. I mean, the fact that not even 500, not even 500,000 people are murdered every year, is that good or bad? Huh? Not even 500,000. Well, 475,000 worldwide. Well, it's bad, yes. I mean, certainly, you know. I would, I would have thought that number would have been just for us. The United States, you know, it's like, yeah. 7 approaching 8 billion people on the planet out of 8 billion, not even 500,000. We might actually be doing pretty good, Miss Cook. You know? Well, but yeah, you're right. It is bad for the. It's still the death of a human being, an innocent human being. Where do homicides? Well, continuing to speak of homicides or murders. Okay, where are the rates of what are the rates of homicides? Were they higher? Were they lower? And they were higher in low and middle income countries, which is another way of saying, you know, in poorer countries or poor countries, you're more likely to get murdered, or countries that were kind of in between poverty and some form of, I wouldn't say wealth, but you know, financial stability, you were more likely to be murdered. I guess that would seem to be true. Well, I can't argue with the numbers if that's what the numbers indicate. And 80%, the great majority, 80% of murders happen to men. Yeah. I don't know if they were killed by other men or women as well. I'm sure women as well, but most of the murders happen to men being killed, mostly between your ages 15 to 29. Okay. All right, you know, I guess that can be true. That seems to be when human beings become frisky in their development, especially males, apparently, you know. From the time that, you know, puberty is going on, well, 15 is a little bit late for your puberty to start, but, you know, you really start growing. I mean, your brain, your body start to really start. So maybe that makes sense biologically that it would be in that age group. You know, once you start getting, ask your parents, once you start getting to your mid 40s and 50s, you might want to become a serial killer, Miss Colonna, but you're just too darn tired. You know, Mr. Klitsch, it's just too much work. It's too much work, you know? And the police would catch me after one killing because I'd be so lazy about it. You watch like they show Dexter and you got to dress up and everything, wear gloves, you know, it's like a whole thing, you know, so you don't leave any DNA evidence. You know, I just kill the person. I'd leave DNA all over the place. They'd get me after one. I wouldn't even be able to become a serial killer. How you doing, Miss Jasmine? How's it going? Though the numbers have fluctuated, as you might imagine, it seems like violence has actually gone down. Has gone down. In 2019, I said, or excuse me, 220. Oh wait, yeah. I said 2021, it was 1.25 million. But if you looked at the year of like 20 years before, in like say 2000, so about a little over 20 years before, it was 1.6 million. So that's kind of good. It seems like things were, you know, you wouldn't know it necessarily from the news or television, but it seems like violence has actually gone down in the last 2 decades. If you look at this map, which comes to us from the United Nations, I believe, shows the most murderous places. Well, that's a weird one. Greenland? Go to Greenland and get killed. Ooh, maybe we should invade and take it over. Anyways, well, Greenland was part of Denmark. It's not its own country, but yeah, there aren't very many people who live there, but yeah, you can see where it is. It's in the Arctic Circle, so it's very snowy and dark most of the year. So I wonder if that has to do. Maybe that affects the psychology. People are alone, isolated, cold, dark. I don't know. So they get violent and kill each other. That's all. I don't know. Don't know why, but yeah, numbers don't lie. According to the statistics, they're right here in red. We're not that bad. We're not great. Canada is low, but we're not. Okay, I guess we could be better. Mexico's more violent. And then as you go down, Colombia, Venezuela, yeah, throughout most of South America, except for Chile. Yeah, Asia, Africa, a lot of countries. South Africa is the most violent, and it's the most westernized. Most of these countries are very poor, we'd say third world countries, but they're just poor countries. Actually, that's very westernized and very rich country, but it's a very violent country apparently. Nigeria as well. Europe does pretty well. I don't see any country except for Albania. This little spot here is Albania, where they have we have problems with blood feuds, between males. If you injure me, then I have to injure you. So they have vendettas all the time. People are killing each other. So that's the problem in Albania. Ukraine, Belarusia, Belarus, Moldavia. Those are. So when you get over here into these countries like the Ukraine, Russia, Belarus, Moldavia, but the rest of Europe seems to be pretty good. China, which has like over 1 billion people, maybe 1.5 billion by now, but apparently very safe to live in, not a lot of violence. Although then again, that could just mean they weren't able to collect data for China, or they're lying. Because we do know that the Chinese government has kind of that's not the word I want to use, has oppressed certain groups, certain Muslim groups in the western provinces, but maybe they're not reporting that, or maybe they just didn't kill them, so it doesn't qualify as murder. Yeah, Burma's been having like a civil war, so that makes sense. Been having a civil war for that's 10 years or so. Papua New Guinea, where I was living, here's Papua New Guinea right above Australia. Yeah, that's a pretty violent place. You have to watch out for yourself. A lot of killings, a lot of tribal warfare. All right, so these are the places that you don't want to be. And it's kind of unfortunate that I'd love to point to our country and see it gray, right, Mr. Lynch? But it's not. Numbers don't lie, unfortunately. We do have a lot of murders, more than maybe we should. So if we look at the numbers for our country, let's see if I put them on here. Yeah, here we go. The Centers for Disease Control, the CDC. Okay, this is in 2019. So it's a little bit dated, but it's about 5 or 6 years ago, or 6 years ago. More than 19,100 people were murdered in the United States. Almost 50,000, 47,500 killed themselves. Yeah, 7 people per hour are murdered in the United States, at least as of the numbers in 2019. I'm not sure. I mean, it might have gone up or down since then. I haven't checked. But nevertheless, still, in an hour, 7 people in our country are murdered. All right. So those are the numbers. And these are real lives. I mean, these are numbers, yes, but these are real people whose lives are gone. Why do so many people kill them? Well, suicide, do violence to themselves. That's been an issue. Well, anyways, violence costs us billions. It's expensive. Whoops. What's this? Oh, that's interesting. Why did I put this on here? Well, it's a website. Yeah, where you can get information on injury, deaths, and rates. and various statistics. This is for the United States, 329 million of us. Crude rate. Okay. Yeah, so if you're interested, you see if I put that in my notes to see why I put it on here, just to show you. If you want to look for violence statistics or where I got them from, this is the website, WISCARS, the Web-Based Injury Statistics Query and Reporting System. Okay, so we'll come back. Get there in a moment. So violence costs us billions in healthcare. Obviously, when people are beaten up or they're stabbed or shot, you know, they got taken to the emergency room or to a hospital. So there are healthcare costs. There are legal costs. You know, you got to pay the police. You got to pay, you know, people go to court, and so they need lawyers. People can't go to work, so you have absenteeism and lost productivity. And according to a 1992 study, this is also in that World Health Organization report on violence that I was showing you before. And then according to that, in a 1992 study, which is 1992, which is rather long ago, but there it is, found direct and indirect costs of gunshot wounds, talking about just gunshots, of $126 billion. I'm assuming that's worldwide. From knife cutting wounds, it was 51 billion. 51 billion. That was costing, and all these costs of treating the injuries, enforcing the law through the police forces and the judicial system to take care of all these crimes or these injuries of violence. So there is an economic cost to violence, as if I didn't need to tell you. I mean, like when I was on my way over here, I was listening to National Public Radio, which I do. Anyways, and I was listening to the BBC News, and they're reporting about, how to funnel more money to Ukraine so it can fight Russia, because so much of Ukraine has been destroyed through war, through violence. So obviously there's an economic cost when things are broken and destroyed. If you want to rebuild it, it's going to cost money. So there's an economic cost to violence for all of us. Okay, even if we're not committing the violence. All right. I'm not to blame, but someone else did it, and now I have to deal with the consequences of it. Okay. The World Health Organization also identifies intentions for violence. What are the intentions for committing violence? Who's doing it? And there are three types of violence here. There's self-directed violence, where you do it to yourself. Okay, that's obvious, self-harm. Interpersonal violence, one person to another, like international, interpersonal. And then there's collective violence. Groups of people doing it to each other. So self-directed violence, obviously the example would be suicide. Or someone like you had this issue with sometimes teenagers in high school cutting themselves and stuff like that. But say suicide, where you're doing it to yourself. Interpersonal violence, like murder. You can't murder yourself. I mean, I guess that's what suicide kind of is. Well, anyways, murder, usually requires two to tango in a murder. A murderer and a person who's murdered. All right. So it's interpersonal. And then collective violence would be like genocide or something like that. In our history of America, we could say slavery or the Indian Wars in the 1800s and stuff like that. Yeah. So, I already mentioned it. There's also this thing, which is more of a modern development, which is called structural violence. Structural violence. And it comes from this dude, Johan Galtung. Johann Galtung, who is where is he from? I'm going to say he was from Scandinavia, like from Sweden. If you want an extra credit point, find out where Johann Galtung comes from. Because I think he's from Scandinavia. But anyways, he's considered the founder of peace and conflict studies. Okay, I don't think we have that degree here, but some schools do. They have, a peace and conflict, a bachelor. You get a bachelor's degree or a master's degree in peace and conflict studies, where you study about violence and why people are violent and blah, 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 the sources of violence like we're doing here. But Galtung introduced this idea of structural violence in addition to direct physical violence. And so he's using it in a wider, broader sense. For him, and it's kind of like the same thing as collective violence, really. According to, Galtung, structural violence occurs through cultural and institutional mechanisms that are used to oppress people. So I mentioned the slave system in the United States, or a class system that might be imposed. So, but going, I think the slavery would be something more appropriate for us because it's more, from our history, we would know it more, or at least know about it more, one would hope. Slavery, you had the Civil War and you had the amendment, what was it, the 18th Amendment to the Constitution? I think it was the 18th Amendment, that abolished, or was it the 14th Amendment? Oh, was it the 18th? Well, another thing someone can fact check me on. But anyways, he's from Norway? Okay, thank you. Johan Galtung. Yeah, I thought it was from Scandinavia. Galtung. Norway. Before I forget. What a name is Cook. Oh. Someone look about the amendments too. Is it the 14th Amendment that ended slavery or the 18th Amendment? They'll say the 18th Amendment. See if I'm right or wrong. Fact check, please. But anyways, the Constitution was amended, so, you couldn't enslave people. Slavery was over, yes? Huh? 13th. The 13th? Oh, it's totally wrong. Totally wrong. Thank you, sir. Mr. Klitsch. So the 13th Amendment. Okay. Nevertheless, the saying after the Civil War and after the 13th Amendment was anything but slavery, especially in the southern states, which that was the policy of a lot of the southern states, or maybe all of the southern states, anything but slavery. They couldn't enslave blacks anymore, but they would put laws and institutions into place to make it essentially the same system, even though technically Americans weren't enslaved anymore. So that would be an example of structural violence. The structure of the society was certainly unjust and injurious to black people before the Civil War, before the abolition of slavery, obviously. But after, when they couldn't do it anymore, they couldn't enslave people, but they still wanted to treat people like slaves. They just created new structures, like the voting laws. You had to prove that you could read and write in order to vote, or you had to pay a tax of a certain amount of money, which was always a little bit too high that, poor people who were usually black people couldn't pay, or you had to do certain other things, stuff like that, just built into the structure of the whole voting system to keep blacks under the control of whites. Or again, drawing the district lines. If you knew a lot of you're in Georgia and most of the blacks live here demographically, and most of the whites live here, but you draw the district or the election lines or whatever in such a way that you'll be able to get all the votes that you want. So if you want all the white votes, or you don't want the black votes, or you don't want you divide up the black communities, so you kind of divide and conquer in that way, so you kind of dilute the influence of their collective vote, stuff like that. it's in the structure. It's built into the structure. So that's what he means. And it is a form of violence because you are committing injury. I mean, not physical injury, but you're treating them unjustly by taking away their right to voice their opinion, which is what a vote is. I think this person should lead us, or I think this policy should be approved. If they have like whatchamacallits, what do they call them when they put stuff in referenda? That's right, a referendum. So that's what he's getting at with this idea. Okay, and if you read the article in the Encyclopedia of Religion from Fritz Graf, he talks about this, that there's a coercive effect. It's inherent, the coercion inherent in societal structures that is used without the agreement of the victims and against their interests. Okay, so you rig the voting system so that no black person will be elected to represent this, like the state of Mississippi. It'll only be white people, even though maybe like 80% of the population is ethnically black or African, of African descent. But we'll make sure that the way the voting system is that only whites will be elected, or only a certain type of person will that. So it's against the interests of the voters because they're not being represented by people who are their peers or are legitimately representing their interests. Now, it's not direct violence, but it can be, and I lost her. But she killed two birds with one stone, right? Threw something out, now she's gonna, we'll do whatever. I don't know. Anyways, another example would be the segregation system, having two types of everything, that were supposed to be separate but equal. Keeping things for, separate buildings for whites and separate buildings for all the other races. Blacks, but I'm presuming that Asians and Hispanics were not allowed to use the white water fountains either, or the white bathrooms. That's right in your face. I mean, that's clearly the structure. You can see it, right? It's a structure. It's right physically in front of you with a sign that says whites only, or this only for use of black people, or the other word, the C word, which I won't use, even though it's apparently okay now. I don't know. Tell me the rules. Will someone tell me the rules, please, so I don't get fired? Really? Now I can't say. All right, so I've been saying blacks the whole time, and I shouldn't be. Tell me the rules. All right, thank you. So you told me you've educated. Yeah, I can try that, because I'm boxing up my stuff. All right, so I'm supposed to say people of color. Don't say black people.
It is not just black.
Okay.
It includes like Hispanics.
And that doesn't sound like colored people? Is that offensive? I mean, if I say colored people, would that be no? Saying black, right? But then how do you have all those people protesting saying Black Lives Matter? Why aren't they saying colored people? I don't. All right. You're telling me the rules. I'll just follow the rules.
Color, not just black.
All right. Good. Thank you, Mr. Saunders, for your silent counsel. I do appreciate that in your vocal, because I don't know anymore. I just don't want to get fired. And I don't want to offend anybody. I don't want to hurt anyone's feelings. But anyways, okay. What was I saying? Structural bias. Well, it's right there. Yeah, whites only, or only whites need apply, and stuff like that. which means everybody else, which can also include white people, because my mom lived in the South and, she, back in the 70s, and she remembered, she had an ad from a newspaper that she clipped out and kept for a job that said no blacks nor Irish need apply, because Irish were not technically considered white because we're not Anglo-Saxon, we're not Germanic, so we're Celts, we're of a different ethnicity. So sometimes, whites and blacks and people of color and Irish people it's surprising. That's maybe not surprising. We're lumped in together. You can see this in some of the old racist photos. They would compare, a person of color with an Irishman, and then have a picture of another animal that I won't name, and say, notice how they look in like this animal, They're not true whites. No, okay, fine. Anyways, so that's clearly structural. That's right there in the structure. You can't, if you're a certain color or ethnicity or whatever, you can't even enter the structure physically. You can't walk in there. And if you try to, then there might be physical violence or the threat of violence, What are you doing in here? You're sitting here in the first class of the train. You can't do that. You're supposed to sit in that section. Well, I'm not going to move. I paid for my ticket. I paid my money. In justice, I have the right to be. No, sir. And if you don't move along, we'll make you move along. So there's that threat of violence in structural violence, even if there's not the physical exertion of violence, but it can get that far. When they tried to end segregation, what happened? People went nuts. They physically violated people. The black students who were, all right, the of color student, all right, they physically attacked the children that they were trying to bring to the schools, the people who were trying to attend the universities. They physically attacked them. So it went from structural violence to actual physical violence. So the threat of physical violence can be a part of structural violence. If you don't follow our rules, we will hurt you. We will cause you physical injury, direct injury. But then I just ask myself, how is structural violence just not physical violence under another name? How is it just not physical violence under another name? Again, is it too broad? Is it just physical violence that's been kind of institutionalized? And, there's always that threat, you follow these rules, you keep in your place. If you don't keep in your place, we'll knock you over the head or something. All right. I'll end there, because I have to go get my kitten from the vet today. Our new kitten. So God bless you all. Unless anyone has any objections, Mr. Bracy, anybody? Thank you, sir. And I will see you all next week. You're welcome. See you, Mr. Melendez. Mr. Klitsch. All right. You're welcome. You did? I didn't notice. Okay. Have a good day, Mr. Thompson. This is Park. Have a good day, sir, miss.
Do you try and speak that it's okay to say black people? That's just specifically saying blacks, just like black people.
Oh, okay.
Like people of color encompasses like every, I guess, ethnic person, like every non-white person. But black people is still like black people, and people of color, it's like the whole thing.
Okay.
Yeah.
But blacks is too triggering, I guess.
It's just in the context, like usually contextually, blacks is used in a not good manner. It's
Okay.
like these blacks are like blacks always.
Well, I don't mean it in a non.
Black
Black is a great color. Okay, no, but okay, yeah. So hopefully I made that clear that that's not how I was using it. But now I understand why.
Yeah, I could see where it was kind of like, oh, you can't say black, but like, you know what I'm saying? Yeah, I was kind of thinking of a good one.
All right. I might still make some mistakes, but just remind me, please.
I
I'll
mean,
try to avoid it.
It's the effort that counts, you know?
All right.
That's all I do. Because people, they'll hear it and they'll be like, well, I don't care. It's like, but the effort is what really counts.
Oh,
At least in my eyes.
thank you, sir.
But
Appreciate it. I do this later because I want to get out of here to go see my little girl. She's coming back from the doctor.